Good afternoon to you. 3:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Tristan Leavitt will join us, an attorney representing IRS whistleblower Gary Shapley, as Hunter Biden is now targeting those whistleblowers for telling the American people the truth. It's an amazing story. We'll talk to Tristan about it, get the latest. Mark Krikorian is here at 4 o'clock. Forget caravans. We now have train loads of illegals headed to the United States. Abby Johnson joins us at 5 o'clock. She used to be with Planned Parenthood. Then she saw the light of human life. And she'll react to all of the news coming out today on that issue. There's a lot of it. And then Buzz Patterson is here at 5:30. He is a retired lieutenant colonel, a pilot who once flew for the United States Air Force. We'll see what he thinks of the idea that we just lost an F-35, a $70 million plane, $80 million, whatever the number is with Biden's inflation. This thing's gone. That's how stealth these things are. We don't even know where it is at this moment. The pilot ejected. The plane disappeared. The United States government now asking for help. Can someone help find an F-35? What an amazing and unfortunate story. You can join us today. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yes, as I mentioned, there was a lot of news this weekend on human life in utero, abortion, whether it was Donald Trump's answers on Meet the Press when he spoke to the new hostess of that program, Kristen Welker, or it is the news that broke over the weekend, and I want to start there, that the Biden administration has once again gotten convictions in the Banana Republic of Washington, D.C., of several of Joe Biden's political opponents. That is, people who stand up for human life are being targeted by the United States Department of Justice, and in particular, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves. He has scored 3 convictions as of Friday, 2 of them on grandmothers in their 70s. 2 of them, 74-year-old Joan Bell and 73-year-old Jean Marshall. I looked up photos of these women, and yes, they look like grandmothers in their 70s, are now looking at 11 years in prison. Their sentencing hearing hasn't taken place yet. They've gotten their convictions, but the Justice Department is bragging about that these women face up to a maximum of 11 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of up to $350,000. U.S. District Court Judge Colleen Collar-Cotley, who presided over the trial, ordered the defendants immediately detained, as in they're not allowed to be free pending their sentencing. Immediately detained. Sentencing will be scheduled at a later date. So they are locked up. And society is safe now that multiple 70-year-old grandmothers can't roam free and suggest that we allow babies to live. We're safer now because of that. Isn't that amazing? And so that happened over the weekend on Friday. Here's how the Catholic News Agency describes this, because you got to search high and low for news outlets that are actually going to refer to people as pro-life. It doesn't happen that often these days. 3 pro-life activists who took part in an October 2022 rescue in a Washington, D.C. abortion facility, each found guilty of felonies that could land them up to 11 years in prison and fines as much as $350,000. The verdict follows a separate trial in which 5 other pro-life activists were also found guilty. The activists, 74-year-old Joan Bell, 73-year-old Jean Marshall, and 41-year-old Jonathan Darnell, were indicted on felony conspiracy against rights and violating the Federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, also known as the FACE Act. Let me pause on that for a moment. We've heard a lot about these FACE Act prosecutions. Abortion mills are not clinics in any meaningful sense of the word. If the sole service you provide is the destruction of human life, it doesn't sound like a very healing place, does it? I love that we use clinic as this ridiculous euphemism to refer to these places. Additionally, the actual clinics in the country, the pro-life pregnancy centers, the places who are trying to help mothers give birth to their children, provide them with resources including diapers and toys and food and everything you could possibly need if you're a struggling mother trying to figure out how to get started with a new baby. Those places are attacked and have been attacked on a routine basis by the American left, haven't they? The foot soldiers of the left throwing Molotov cocktails at these places, smashing out their windows, setting them on fire, writing things like Jane was here, Jane's revenge, whatever that means, spray painting it on the side of these buildings. And then I almost said Governor Ralph Northam, because his cruelty is also on my mind this afternoon. But when Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, says, yeah, we can't do anything about those crimes. Why? Well, because they're committed at night, and it's so hard to see at night. Not if you're Lauren Boebert, apparently. You can see everything happening with Lauren Boebert. Since when did theaters start getting night vision cameras in the corner of the room? Isn't that a weird thing? That's a strange thing. Anyway, sorry, that was a tangent. But Merrick Garland said you can't see at night, so it's very hard to go after these people who are attacking in all these terrorist attacks, these pro-life pregnancy centers, which are actual clinics. They're actual places where people get actual health care and assistance with bringing a life into the world. They're wonderful. And Merrick Garland says they can't be protected because the attacks happen at night. Meanwhile, the pro-lifers who sing church hymns outside of these abortion mills, or who show up there with T-shirts on saying that all life is sacred and let's protect human life, and this is what a human looks like, and this is what abortion looks like. Have you ever seen those signs? They're gruesome. It's just awful. It's a human being detached limb to limb. But some of the pro-life activists will show these pictures as a way to say, like, look, this is a real human life at stake here. They're facing 11 years in prison. Those people, 11 years. Lock them up. That's the position of the left here. And that's the position of the Biden administration. And that's the position of U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves, who, I should also remind you, doesn't prosecute actual crimes. Matthew Graves turned down 77% of all arrests last year in the District of Columbia. People busted for anything, like theft and shoplifting and making your city hellish, making the nation's capital hellish. Matthew Graves doesn't prosecute those people. 77% of all arrests he turned down. And he's just out of control. He has decided that his sole purpose in life and the way that he wants to be remembered in American history is to savage the left's political opponents, including the least powerful among them. Destroying the powerless, that's Matthew Graves' thing. He loves that. He loves that. Allowing the city he's supposed to be responsible for to rot, and then destroying the lives of the powerless. Random Americans who went into the Capitol building January 6th, people who didn't even go into the Capitol building January 6th of 2021, he wants to make sure that they rot in prison for as long as they can, including in some cases, given the advanced age of many of the defendants, for the rest of their lives. That's who Matthew Graves is. He brags that he's brought over 1,000 prosecutions in those cases for a riot that took place on January 6th, including for many people who weren't even rioting. That's who he is. Apparently, his whole family's this way. He's got himself a wife. She is also a very busy little bee. She's a busy activist. In fact, she runs an organization, and the reason I know this is thanks to the excellent work of Julie Kelly. Her name's Fatima Gross Graves. This is Matthew Graves' wife. She runs an organization called the National Women's Law Center. Now, if you're wondering what that is, as soon as you see women in the name, there are very few groups that have women in the name that actually represent women and traditional values or American values or family values. Unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations that put women in the name who are not representing anything decent whatsoever. Instead, it's the craziest crap. And that's what Mrs. Graves is involved in. She's an abortion-loving whack job. She's a lunatic. And so, in case you would like an example of this, I'm sure you do. Here it is. Here's an example of Fatima Gross Graves standing with a bunch of, I think she's outside the Supreme Court in this clip. This is during the Kavanaugh. Yeah, it's at the Supreme Court. This is during the Kavanaugh confirmation process. And here she is screaming into a microphone about how much she loves abortion and how bad it would be if Brett Kavanaugh joins the United States Supreme Court. Take a listen.
My name is Fatima Goss-Graves.
Fatima, excuse me.
I am president of the National Women's Law Center, and I am here to say we will win this fight. We will win this fight.
Oh, my gosh. Imagine coming home to that every day.
We know that Judge Kavanaugh could shift the balance of this court. We know what is at stake. It's our reproductive freedom that is at stake.
Meaning, so reproductive freedom. Everything's euphemism. Everything. There are clinics. It's reproductive freedom. First of all, it's not reproductive. The whole act is destructive. It's to end a human life. Why is that reproductive freedom? It's a lie. It's an Orwellian lie. And here she is screaming about it at the United States Supreme Court. This woman has carte blanche access to Joe Biden. Julie Kelly, and again, in her excellent reporting on this subject, has dug into this. And Just the News had a great report on this in July. Fatima Gross-Graves, president of the National Women's Law Center and wife of Biden-appointed U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, comma, as Vince adds, a man who doesn't actually prosecute real crimes in D.C., comma, visited the White House at least 28 days during the Biden administration, official records show. She has a key card to the White House. There's a door dedicated to this woman. Her visits have picked up in frequency since she first came to the Biden White House in 2021 when she visited 4 days. Graves, that is the woman, visited the White House 5 days in March of 2022, as well as 3 in September and 3 in December of that year, in addition to other sporadic visits throughout the year. Records for 2023 are only available through March, but in 3 months alone, she visited 10 days, mostly in February and March. Graves is known for her liberal activism, including her support for affirmative action, that's racial prejudice, and abortion, that's the destruction of human life, and she has attended numerous White House events. So she has been a regular fixture at the Biden White House. A regular fixture. And she was showing up a whole bunch during a really critical time, wasn't she? This was March of 2022. She was at the White House 5 days that month. 5 days. When was the Dobbs decision? When did that come down? Do we remember off the top? Was it June? So it was just after this time frame. So this is as the court was contemplating and arguing. And she was there to, cause all the chaos in the world. And maybe to get the marching orders out of the White House. Hey, we've got to start destroying some lives here. Because what happened? You have all these pro-lifers who are being locked up, thrown in jail. And in some cases, if you're 71 years old or 72 years old, 74 and 73, those are their ages. 74 and 73, 11 years in prison. If they get slapped with the maximum sentence here, they may never see the outside world again. Ever. A lot of tears in court on Friday as the convictions were handed down in a district where you can't get a fair trial if you stand on the side of liberty and justice and decency in the country. The D.C. court shouldn't even exist. It should be defunded. U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves should not have that job. He should be gone. But this is the world we live in. And so now these elderly women are going to have to fend for themselves behind bars now because they stood up for life. Okay. Yeah, the Justice Department completely out of control. Still, if you need more evidence for it, I don't know what to tell you at this point. You're a lost soul. But yeah, they're just completely out of control. Let's head on over to the state where the Constitution was suspended by the governor. Adrian calling in from Albuquerque, New Mexico, now line 1. Adrian, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Vince. Vince, I just wanted to make a quick comment regarding America's, or actually the world's most famous drug addict. I was dreaming, what if the United States of America, what if we actually had a legitimate Department of Justice. And you know what I would love to see? I'd love to see Hunter Biden being called to testify against his daddy. And I would love it to be televised, because we would all be treated to a really special event, because we would be witnessing someone spilling their guts like no one has ever spilled their guts before. It would be must-see television.
Yeah. Why not? We've got deposition video of Donald Trump mixing it up with attorneys and stuff. Why not Hunter Biden? Why not give us a video of him just talking about the whole family's finances, how Joe Biden was involved in the whole damn thing? If we had a legitimate justice system, these guys would be front and center. And yet that's not happening at all, Adrian. In fact, he gets charged with a couple of gun crimes. Fine. I still don't think he's going to see a day inside of a jail cell. It's not like he's a 73-year-old grandma. Come on now. It's not like he's pro-life or anything. He just had a little old gun charge where he lied on a gun background check form and obtained a gun illegally. Who cares? Everybody does that. Right, Adrian?
Absolutely. And I don't know about other people, but Hunter Biden, he strikes me as the kind of guy that he'd sell out his whole family for about $500.
Yeah, or some Parmesan cheese that he thought was crack. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's no, he's right. The left is still doing this whole song and dance today. I saw some lefties today being like, Biden got Shokin fired because that was U.S. policy. They're screeching about this. That's the reason it happened. It wasn't because he was trying to protect his son and his family's business arrangement. Does that make sense? So, seriously, just do the math on this. So Biden got Shokin fired to make it so that Ukraine would open an investigation into Burisma, to open an investigation into the company that his son was on the board of. That's why Biden got Shokin fired. You don't make any sense. You make slightly more sense than Joe Biden does on any given day. And that's not much. Coming up, an IRS whistleblower attorney joins us to react to Hunter Biden's new lawsuit against that agency for telling us the truth. Good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, 4 o'clock, Mark Krikorian talks about the border crisis with us. We've got trains full of illegals coming our way. Abby Johnson is here at 5 o'clock. We'll talk about saving lives with her and all of the news on that subject coming up, as well as Buzz Patterson joins us at 5:30, retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, pilot. See if we can get his help tracking down a missing F-35. Where'd the thing go? How do we find it? And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Just a couple months ago, a couple of IRS whistleblowers brought their story public of all of the ways in which the United States Department of Justice was interfering into an investigation into Hunter Biden and, by extension, his father, Joe. You can't ask about Joe. You can't ask about the big guy. You can't ask about Dad. Those were some of the warnings that an assistant U.S. attorney, at least, in the out of Delaware, was giving to investigators as they were digging into the Biden family's taxes. Well, now Hunter Biden is suing the IRS. Overnight, we get the report Hunter Biden has sued the Internal Revenue Service, alleging that its agents, quote, targeted and sought to embarrass him when discussing his private tax information, violating his rights as a taxpayer. Interesting. Also, what would be embarrassing about any of this? Why would you be embarrassed to have your taxes exposed here? For more on this, let's bring in Tristan Leavitt. He's a president of Empower Oversight and an attorney representing IRS whistleblower Gary Shapley as well. Tristan, great to have you with us, sir.
Thanks so much for having me, Vince.
This is interesting. So why would Hunter Biden be embarrassed by the disclosure of this information?
Well, that's an excellent question. I saw recently that it said he was embarrassed also by the laptop repair shop owner releasing the laptop that's not his up in Delaware. But I definitely know that whatever he's embarrassed by or not, that the IRS whistleblowers, including the one that I help represent, Gary Shapley, didn't release anything out of a target for a specific taxpayer. They just observed inappropriate interference and preferential treatment, both by the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office and then by the Department of Justice overall. And that's a problem for the administration of justice in this country. So they wanted to bring that to Congress to highlight both the problems with the double standard of justice,
Yes,
as well as how it conflicted with statements that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, had made before Congress.
and the IRS whistleblowers, including your client, it seems they did everything the right way. They approached the correct committee. They brought all of the information in an orderly fashion. If these guys were doing something that was illegal or speaking out of school, the media would have already had these guys like strung up. But that's not the case here, is it?
Absolutely not. And not only the media, but the IRS is extremely strict about taxpayer privacy. The IRS would have also brought the hammer down.
Yes.
And this lawsuit filed this morning specifically complains that the IRS has done nothing to stop these individuals from sharing that information. And that's because the IRS is bound by the whistleblower protection laws, which
Right.
is the area that I'm kind of most expert in. And they allow someone to bring this information forward. Even though there are provisions for protecting the privacy of taxpayer information, Congress, same Congress that wrote those protections, also wrote itself an exception. And so that's why we went to the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. And once they release that information, it's public. And so like any American citizen, anyone can speak about that, including Gary Shapley.
That's for sure. Meanwhile, my understanding is that the IRS whistleblowers, actually, when they came forward, they kind of really changed the calculus over at the Justice Department. There was some panic over the emergence of the whistleblowers as it related to Hunter Biden's case, because we saw Hunter Biden go forward and try and basically skate through with a very sweetheart deal from the United States Department of Justice, but that all fell apart. What role do you think the IRS whistleblowers played in that?
Well, I think there's a twofold role. First of all, what you see is you look both at their disclosures as well as what's been released since then by the media, which the whistleblowers didn't have access to, is that this case was dead at the beginning of this year after the U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California, a guy named Martin Estrada, who had donated to Kamala Harris's campaign, was a definite, prominent Democrat, and then was appointed by Biden to that position. Once he declined to bring charges in California, U.S. Attorney Weiss was out of avenues. He either had to get special counsel authority from the Attorney General, which had been denied in the past, or he had to let the case die. And so that's what was happening. It was falling by the wayside. And so it's only because the whistleblowers came forward that it seems the Justice Department thought, we need to tie this up some way. We need to close out this case. That's where you see then this string of emails that have been released where they were originally going to offer a complete, not just a sweetheart deal, but a complete pass, right, where they would have required the Hunter plead guilty to no charges. And even that then got scotched as the whistleblower allegations continued to gain attention. And people said, wait a minute,
Right.
why, and so before the sweetheart deal got released, there was an even better deal for Hunter. And U.S. Attorney Weiss had to come in and say, this isn't a good idea. You have to at least plead guilty to a couple of these charges. And of course, even that imploded.
Yeah, it's interesting watching these revelations come out. So Joseph Ziegler and Gary Shapley, they come out in public and they say all of this, and it's really jaw-dropping to hear it. But I don't know either, man. I couldn't vouch for their credibility per se. It looks like they have great records at the IRS. They've been investigating tax crimes for many years. They by their own admission, had good reputations among their colleagues. But what I've been struck by is that the media hasn't really found an angle on these guys. I'm sure that they've been looking for one, but hasn't found an angle on these guys to suggest they're anything but credible. I think that's been very interesting and really telling.
Yeah, I agree. I will say that it's frustrating because then the media goes with whatever meager, tiny thing they can. And so, the House Ways and Means and the House Judiciary Committees have been conducting interviews of witnesses in the last week and a half. And so you may have seen some headlines saying that FBI supervisor denies or refutes claim.
Yes.
And what it comes down to is that these supervisors said, I don't remember, U.S. Attorney Weiss using that sentence. And that's what the media has hung their hats on. Meanwhile, they proceeded to say in the same interviews, but yeah, we knew that D.C. declined charges. We knew that the Central District of California declined charges. And we were sure Weiss had a way to go somewhere after that. And then their knowledge completely breaks down because they all admit they don't know what comes next. And what comes next under DOJ tax policy, which FBI agents are not the experts in. And in fact, with the FBI special agent in charge specifically said, I start to tune out when they talk about the tax charges because that's really not my area of expertise. But what happens is if you can't get the U.S. attorney and the other district to partner with you, you either have to get DOJ tax to endorse, which DOJ tax was withholding an endorsement on, or you have to get special authority from the Attorney General. So that, to us, was the real headline out of those interviews, right? That's the ball game that everyone else acknowledged that these other U.S. attorneys blocked the charges.
Yeah, Politico had a report 5 days ago, headline, FBI official, Hunter Biden prosecutor faced pushback. And even their lead sentence in the piece was, an FBI agent involved in the Hunter Biden probe said the prosecutor leading it, that's David Weiss, sought but was denied help from a key fellow U.S. attorney. That would be the U.S. attorney in California, who denied help to David Weiss here. So in other words, like, Weiss didn't have all this power that he was claiming to have, or if he did, he was certainly not exercising it.
Well, and this was already, right? This is a bit of a farce to begin with, because as even Jake Tapper and other very legacy media sources have noted, right, if Weiss had all the authority to begin with, like Garland said, he wouldn't have needed to be appointed as special counsel.
Right.
So I think a lot of people who just took at face value the Justice Department's denials of the whistleblower allegations and Garland saying, oh, he has all the authority, were scratching their head when he got appointed as special counsel, because it didn't fit in any way with the narrative that they had, taken hook, line, and sinker from the Justice Department.
Right. So now that Hunter Biden is suing the IRS, what does this mean for your client, Gary Shapley? How is he going to be involved in this lawsuit, if at all?
Well, since it's against the IRS, I mean, it's not against him individually. My co-counsel, Mark Laddell, and I are referenced in the lawsuit as Attorney A, and I'm Attorney B. But, I believe the statute only gives Hunter's attorneys the authority to file with the IRS anyway. It doesn't give them a right of action against any specific employee. So it really doesn't directly bear on them. The real question for us is, will the Justice Department, as it relates to this lawsuit, settle, in which case they would be, basically Hunter's attorneys have handed them an assist to say, hey, here's a way that you can undercut these whistleblowers by saying, oh, you're right, this was disclosed,
right.
It shouldn't have been.
Right.
We've seen no evidence of that so far, but again, that's a consideration. The other thing that's really concerning is not just this general lawsuit from Hunter's attorneys. It's that DOJ has shown in the past its willingness to follow the prompting of the White House. And you see this with the D.C. U.S. attorney, who had the charges presented to his office. His first assistant, that's the top career official in the office, told the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office they were optimistic about the case and they were going to assign a prosecutor to help with it. Then, on March 31st of 2022, White House spokesperson Kate Bedingfield said at a press conference, the president still believes his son did nothing wrong. And right at that time is when the U.S. Attorney for D.C., Matt Graves, rejected the case and said, no, we're not partnering either. And so, having seen that happens already, it's not behind-the-scenes coordination, but the White House says what it wants in these public forums, and parts of DOJ, move to match that. And so over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal reported that some White House aides have been grumbling that they think that the IRS whistleblowers should have been dealt with more harshly by DOJ. And so we're waiting to see if DOJ takes that prompting and does come after the whistleblowers, not in the way that a private citizen can file the suit like Hunter's attorneys have, but if prosecutors specifically will try and go after the whistleblowers.
And for something like mishandling information that they should have kept secret involving Hunter Biden. I mean, there's clearly there's an effort here to create a credibility crisis for your client and these whistleblowers.
Yeah, that's right.
And
it would be the same. Basically, this lawsuit teed up, even though the IRS, it's unlikely to prevail on the IRS level, but this lawsuit teed up if DOJ wanted to bring something where they would need to look, which, again, we believe they would realize that because Congress authorized the release of this, none of it would match up.
Tristan Leavitt, can you remind me of that date? Did you say it was March 21st that the White House spokeswoman said something to the effect of Joe believes his son did nothing wrong?
March 31st of 2022.
31st.
And then if you go to the interview transcript from Gary Shapley that was released by the Ways and Means Committee, he notes in there that the U.S. Attorney right at the very end of March, that's when he declined charges, reversing his career first assistant.
And that came after the White House statement. That would have been the same day then if it's the 31st.
That's right. And either the 31st or April 1st, he wasn't consulting notes as we sat there in that interview. But again, right there at the end of March was when it was presented. And so, yeah, this clearly had an impact.
Amazing. It's just amazing. I'm so glad. I mean, obviously you have to by virtue of your job, but I'm so glad somebody's paying attention to the details. That seems like a really big deal. And then one last thing for you. Over the weekend, you mentioned this Wall Street Journal report, and The framing of the Wall Street Journal report is that the White House was grumpy that they don't have enough control over Merrick Garland anymore. That he's just striking out independently, and he's upholding the law without political interference. What do you make of that frame?
I don't know. I mean, it's so at every level here, right? I mean, my background as a congressional investigator is to be very cynical, which has only been furthered by my career working as a whistleblower lawyer. So I don't know in terms of Merrick Garland. I know that there are many, why he decided this was the time, or maybe the bigger question is with Weiss. Why it is that Weiss finally requested this information or this appointment as special counsel now is a big mystery, because Weiss, as of the end of last year, himself was very grumpy with Special Agent Shapley for making these disclosures about him. And as Weiss learned that Shapley throughout the case had been highlighting the ways that prosecutors pulled punches or made decisions that he believed were unethical, that's why Weiss directed that he be taken off the case. So it's hard to know. Again, I'm sure the White House is grumpy about a lot of things right now, right? And, whether Merrick Garland, to what extent he holds up or under pressure or he maintains any semblance of independence, I don't have insight to. And same with Weiss, who, again, has kind of gone back and forth. How do you go from being in a position where you're not going to bring a case at all, and then you're going to let them go with no charges at all, and then you back away and still have this hidden immunity agreement in the sweetheart plea deal that Judge Noriega torpedoes, and then go from that to bringing the gun charges right now? I mean, it's just a total roller coaster, right? So what's in David Weiss's mind, nobody knows.
If the IRS whistleblowers, to include, again, your client, Gary Shapley, hadn't come forward, do you think that David Weiss would be a special counsel today?
Without question, no. I think this case would just be dead. People would be saying, are we ever going to hear about that at some time? And he would just sit on it until the statute of limitations had expired for all of the charges.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Tristan Leavitt. Really appreciate your time today. Look forward to chatting with you again soon, sir. Thank you. You see all these allegations coming out now about the comedian Russell Brand, who talk about a guy whose career is entirely different than what it was, let's say a decade ago. He was kind of a ridiculous narcissist. In fact, he was super annoying early in his Hollywood career. To the point that I didn't like him. I was like, I don't like this guy at all. But over time, it seems like he matured a lot, and he started creating kind of an online presence where he was like thoughtful and empathetic and interested. And look, his politics definitely don't line up with mine in most cases. But where I do find some agreement is his efforts to go after the establishment, right? Asking questions of the pharmaceutical industry, asking basic questions about how close we are to a full-blown nuclear war at any given moment, which moneyed interests were advancing as opposed to the interests of the people of the United States or any other country for that matter. Those are all fundamental questions that we should all be exploring, and to a great extent, he's been doing them. So, I see these basically sexual allegations are coming out against him for the way that he is alleged to have sexually assaulted women earlier in his career. He put out a video over the weekend saying, this is all this stuff is about to come out. It's a lie, and it's all predicated on I'm being attacked for the interest groups that I'm going after nowadays. And that's why this is happening, he says. And I've seen a couple women go online and say that they had relationships with him when they were younger, and they're all vouching for him. He was perfectly decent. He treated me so well. He was so respectful, suggesting, essentially that they think there's not much to these allegations, or at least can speak from their own experience that things were good. But I will say, regardless of whatever the underlying truth is here, I can tell you how these things come to pass, how they become as public as they are, and why these allegations are popping up now. True or not, they're definitely popping up because of Russell Brand's politics. That is absolutely the reason these stories are being aired out now and why they're trying to take him down with them. Because when you go up against major industries with an effective voice, this is a high-profile celebrity who's taking all of the cachet of his time as a Hollywood celebrity and comedian and turning it against the forces that are governing so many of the decisions in your lives. So when he asks questions about masks and vaccines and everything else, there's a lot of money on the line. Pharmaceutical industry, how much does it cost to hire a PR firm to spend, a little bit of time digging into every aspect of this guy's life to see whether or not you can debilitate one of your chief critics? Not much. Not much for the pharmaceutical companies. They can forget that expense. That's petty cash to destroy Russell Brand's life, isn't it? It's the same with asking questions about war, the military-industrial complex. They can come at you without even thinking about how much. That's a steakhouse lunch for the military industrial complex. That's nothing to take him down. So in the midst of this, again, regardless of whether or not it's true, and if it is true, shame on him. That's horrific to put a woman in this situation. No question why that story is rising today, though.